So this is the last video for our introduction to Python inputs and outputs, and in this video we are going to tackle problem 3, our first calculator, and in this one we are going to use what we have done already, so that is using the print command to display outputs and use the input command to get inputs. But we are going to have a look at different data types for variables and how to use them. So let's click on problem 3, the first calculator, and let's have a look at what this entails. There we go. So we clicked on problem 3 and you can see problem 3, the first calculator, and you can see it says write a program that asks the user to enter a number. It will ask the user to enter another number and then it will output the result of the two numbers multiplied together, and also output the result of the two numbers added together. So let's have a little look at this and what complications this introduces. So I'm going to write a program that is similar but not the same, and I'm going to write a program that allows the user to enter a single number and outputs what that number is multiplied by itself. So let's start off with our program. Once again, we need the print command to prompt the user, and let's go with enter a number, and that's going to display that on the screen. So we need to get the input from the user, and we'll call this variable, let's make sure it's sensible, so we'll call it number1, and that is going to equal the input. So a number that is multiplied by itself is a squared number, so let's use that as the variable name. So we're going to type squared equals, and then we are going to multiply that variable by itself. So let's go with number1 multiplied by number1. That multiplies them together. Just a little note about this: in Python we use the star symbol to multiply numbers together. There are some other basic arithmetic operations that you should probably be aware of. We can add two values together, we can subtract one value from another, and we can also use the backslash button to perform division. So that is number1 divided by number1. Doesn't make much sense, and in this occasion we really want to multiply those two numbers together to get our square number anyway. So finally, let's output the result of our mathematical operation by using the print command. So we want to print, and we put squared, that is, and then let's concatenate or join onto the end the squared variable. So we can see it's going to output enter a number, allow them to enter a value and store that in number1. Then we're going to make the variable squared. Then we're going to assign the value of number1 multiplied by number1, or multiplying the number by itself, to the variable squared. And then we're going to output squared, that is, plus whatever's in the squared variable. Let's run that program and see what happens. It's quite happy. We have started off. Let's enter the number 14 and see what happens. And straight away we get an error from our program. Now, how can that be? Because we are reasonably sure that we have done this correctly. So what error have we made? So first of all, a syntax error is just an error in the rules of the language, the grammar, and it's basically saying here we can't multiply a sequence of non-integer values of type string. Basically, we have a value, which is this number1, which actually happens to be a string, and you cannot multiply strings together. Now, the reason for this is because whenever we take an input from the user, it comes from the user's input as a string. What we really need is we need those two values to be integers or numbers so that we can actually perform maths operations on them. Strings aren't meant to have maths operations on them, numbers are. So the way that we fix this problem is to convert the string entered by the user for this input into an integer so that we can perform a multiplication on it. It's dead easy, a lot of words, but actually the process of doing it is really quite simple. We type the word int and then we put the input command, get that right, in brackets, and that is it. So it's going to take the input from the user and then it's going to convert that into an integer. Anything in brackets gets converted into an integer, so it's going to convert this string. So number1 will now be an integer, and that will perfectly, happily run number1 times number2. Let's run it, see what happens, see if that's fixed. So let's put in 14 again, press enter, and now we have another error. This time though, the error is not on line 3, but on line 4. So we've obviously fixed the error from before, but we have another syntax error, and it says you cannot concatenate string and int object. So what's going on here? What is the problem here? Well, the problem is on this print command, we have squared, that is, So we have the words, the string squared that is, and then we are trying to plus or concatenate this squared variable. But that squared variable is actually an integer. So what we need to do now is convert this integer value back into a string. Dead easy to do that. We are going to type str. We're going to open a bracket and close a bracket at the end, and that's it. So we are going to take the squared variable, which is currently an int, and convert it into a string. Now don't worry too much if you've got a little bit lost there. It's quite simple. You're going to practice that a lot over the next few inputs and outputs exercises. But just to quickly recap, whenever we take an input from the user, it is a string. If we need it to be a number, we need to use the int command to cast it to an integer. We might want to cast it to a float, but we're going to come to that much later on. And then if we want to output a value that is an integer and we want to output that to the screen and join it to a string, we can actually output integers as long as we're not joining them to a string. Then we need to use the str command and in brackets put the value that we want to output. Let's just test that, see if that works. I'm going to run the program, enter a number. Let's go with 10. 10 squared is 100, so that's what we should see in the output. And there we go. Squared, that is 100. That gives you all of the tools that you need in order to solve this project. Obviously, if I run the tests on this project right now, it is not going to work because we haven't got the correct outputs. And that's your job. Try and create the solution to this project. Try and make sure that it allows the user to enter two numbers and will output what those numbers are multiplied together and what those numbers are added together. Feel free to pause this video. I will go through the solution in a moment for anyone that is struggling. And don't forget to run the tests. If you complete the test for this particular exercise, that is the end of our introduction to inputs and outputs in Python. You should now be able to continue with the rest of the projects in that section. Right, I'll speak to you in a moment. Pause the video and come back if you need some further support. Okay, so we're back again and let's solve this problem 3 first calculator. So we can see we've got two inputs required. So let's do the prompts. Print, enter the first number. That's what it's asking us to display on the screen. We can see that just there. And then it wants us to allow them to enter a value. So let's get that. Let's go with number 1. Seems to make sense. And let's go with input. Let's not forget that in this case, we are going to do some mathematical operations on it. So in that case, we need this input to be an integer, not a string. So we're going to cast it or convert it to an integer. Let's do the same thing for the second number. Print, enter the second number. We're trying to make sure that we match the output just down here as close as we can. Let's go like that. And then let's go number 2 equals, and we'll do it all together there. Let's convert that one into an integer as well. So now we need to do our calculations. We need to multiply them and add them together. So let's go with multiplied equals number 1 multiplied by number 2. That's going to give us those two multiplied together. And let's do added as well equals number 1 plus number 2. Remembering our mathematical operations. Finally, we need to output them both. Let's not forget now that these two values will be integers, so we will need to convert them back to strings for our output. So we'll do first print, making sure that we match our output as closely as we can, equals, and then let's plus onto there, convert the variable to a string so we can output it properly, multiplied. So that's the first one. We've got multiplied equals and then whatever's in the multiplied variable converted to a string. And finally print, and this time we want added equals and then plus converted to a string, added. And that is our solution. Looks like quite a lot of code. We're racking up a little bit here, but this is really the beginnings of where we need to be. Let's just check that that works. Let's run it, enter our first number, 10. And enter the second number 10, and you can see that multiplied that is 100 and added that is 20. I'm reasonably confident that the test will pass. Let's press the test button, and we have successfully passed the tests for this project. So we've completed that particular project. I'm going to go back to project select. We have completed all of the introduction exercises for inputs and outputs. You should be ready to complete all of these particular problems, and I will see you again for selection. Take care.